So we live in a crazy world. And part of our job is to figure out how to live in a crazy world. Our world is going faster and faster. We heard a podcast the other day that said in the last 20 years, there have been more changes than in the previous 500 years. So in our lifetime, all of us here, things have changed more quickly than they did for our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents all together. Our world is going faster and faster, and yet we are still just human beings. We are not really able to keep up with the pace of our life. And I think that's one of the things that we learned so much in the Camino. A wise man, Solomon, prayed this prayer for the people that lived at his time in what for him was a crazy world. Solomon prayed, "May he keep us centered and devoted to him, following the life path he has cleared, watching the signposts, walking at the pace and rhythms he laid down for our ancestors." We're as Christians called to live in the world, but not be of the world, to be a different kind of person. But how do we do that? God promises peace and joy and calls us to live a life of love. But how? How do we do that? We want to share some life lessons that we think are the beginnings of learning about that question for us.
Life is a journey, and it happens one step at a time. So Proverbs 16:9 says, "In their hearts, humans, us, plan our course, but God determines the steps. In our hearts, we make our plans, but the Lord is the one who establishes our steps."
We can't plan what will happen tomorrow. Bob and April didn't plan for their baby to be born with a heart defect. The man we're praying for in Punta del Este didn't plan to have a car accident. We can't plan the crises in our lives, but we can prepare for them. And I think that's one of the things that we need to incorporate into our lives. When things are going well, let's take advantage of that time and grow and develop ourselves as people so that when a crisis happens, we're ready. We take to a crisis the person we already are. In Godly Play, we talk about all the Sundays that aren't special Sundays as being the green, growing Sundays. The times that we can get the necessary input in our lives that we need. This is called being proactive, not being reactive. That's the opposite. Being proactive is taking advantage of the time and preparing myself for something. Here's what it says in the dictionary. It is acting in advance of a future situation rather than just reacting. It means taking control and making things happen rather than just adjusting to a situation or waiting for something to happen. And so to be proactive is an important skill that we can get, that we can learn in our lives.
We have to learn to develop. So one day some people came and they spoke at our church on a Sunday morning. A friend said, "Hey, you should have these guys speak at your church. They're passing through," and they did, and they came home to our house for lunch. And during the lunch, they said, "When was the last time you took a sabbatical?" I said, "Well, we never took a sabbatical." They said, "Well, I think you should. How long have you been in ministry, working as a pastor?" I said, "Well, at that point, it was more than 25 years. He said, "Well, I think you need a sabbatical." And he said a few more things, and his wife agreed. And I said, "Well," I said, "Thank you." But inside, I said, that's somebody else's life. You know, well, I'm pastoring a church, so what do? I just leave? And what would happen? And I thought at the moment I didn't think of them as anxieties and fears, but truly I had some anxieties and fears and just a different way of thinking. And he said, well, when you decide to take your sabbatical, let us know. We have a place where you can stay. So I said, okay, well, that's great. Thanks. Well, from there, it was probably 2 years before we left. And our mission doesn't have something for someone like me called sabbatical. But I looked it up and wrote them, and I said, look, I'd like to have 6 months, 4 to 6 months, because that's what the guy said. You should take 4 to 6 months and just take a break after 25 years, now 28 years, and just make sure you're hearing from the Lord. You're connected to your wife. You have a lot of years left to go to lead a church, to lead a community. And so I really found that I was so busy that it was too busy, that it was hard for me to be present in the moment. I was worried about the future. I was often irritated about the present and different kinds of things. And I said, I do need a time and a space for the Lord to shape me and us in some new ways for our marriage, for our family, and to be present as leaders that can help and serve and guide so many people like yourselves that are coming through. I need to be a learner. I need to be a listener. I found I wasn't much of a listener. So those things came together, and we began to pray and say what would happen. And that's when Marilyn appeared, and I said, Marilyn, I wonder, what if we left? Would you be willing to stay a little bit longer and help us out? And so we began to talk about that. And about the time she said, I'd be willing to help, but we need some more help. That's when Nate called and he said, I've finished and I've been down to Christ Church, but I'd like to come back for a year. I said, that'll be wonderful, but you won't be working with me, you'll be working with Marilyn. So those kinds of things. And we just saw how where we make our plans, and in my plans, a sabbatical and leaving and visiting our supporters and spending some needed time with my family and with each other, it seemed impossible. It wasn't in my plans. But the Lord establishes the steps, and he had a different plan. And when I began to be willing to say, I wonder, then he opened the way.
Together is good, but together takes time and skill. The Christian calling is to love each other and to love well. John 13 says, Jesus says, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. To love is hard. It is really nice to be loved, to know there are some people out there who love me. That is a great feeling. Or to be in love. Our newly married people show us how nice it is to be in love and how inspiring that is. It feels wonderful, but to love is hard. And John and I were struggling. We are committed to each other. We knew we were meant to be together and meant to be here in Uruguay, but it was very hard. We were living with lots of pressure. We have very different personalities. Those of you who know us know that we're like opposite responses and reactions to about everything. And so how are we going to do this? How are we going to keep on going and be together and yet be so different? We needed the time. We were committed, but what does this mean? And the Camino gave us time. It gave us time. I said to John at one point, it is a privilege that we're walking 6 to 8 hours every day, just the two of us, to be able to talk about everything. But it's not only talking, because you can talk and then you can really talk, right? And so we needed these skills. We needed skills to know how to talk, to be able to talk well with each other, to listen to each other, to learn from each other. We were able to do that. we were able, because of the emotionally healthy spirituality, which we've talked about a lot of times, we hope all of you sign up for the emotionally healthy spirituality courses that we're going to do next year. Because, why? It has changed our lives. It has made such a difference in our relationship. We took the skills that we learned through those courses into the Camino. And we used all of the skills. There are like 8 or 9 skills that we learned, and we used them the whole time. John, I'm puzzled why you still have that stick in your hand. That's a skill, to not judge, to not say, oh, why is he doing that? But to say, I'm puzzled. I wonder why you're doing that. Then he has an opportunity to explain, and it opens the communication instead of shutting it down. If I say, why are you doing that? It shuts down the communication. He gets defensive, and we have no more communication. But if I ask an open question, then we have a way to communicate. Well, we practiced these things for the whole time that we were gone. These are the basic building blocks of love. These are the practical applications of love. And we have to practice them proactively before a crisis happens, so that when we're in a crisis, we can handle it. We know what to do. We know what skill we can use in this situation to help us get through it and not just get stuck in it.
Yeah, Lisa and I are very different. So we needed some time to work things out and to be able to talk about it. But just by ourselves, we couldn't. So we needed the outside coaching. We needed the time and the place. If you go take the walk across Spain, the Camino de Santiago, or 2 weeks in Rocha, or whatever it is, just being somewhere doesn't change you. You have to do something. That's that proactivity that Lisa was talking about. So if I want to change, if I want to be different, what am I going to do? And one of the things I had to learn to do was to listen differently. I was realizing I didn't really know how to listen very well. And sometimes we have insecurities because we compare what's on our inside with what is on somebody else's outside. Does that make sense? We see somebody else and we think, wow, that person just really doing great. I would like to be like them. They have nice clothes, or they're eating at that place, or they're happy. And we see their outside or their Facebook profile, think, wow, what a nice life. And we compare our own insecurities and the things we know. Well, you know, in our relationships, people invite us and ask us to do the things that we're good at. If we tell jokes and we're happy, they say, hey, come be part of our party. If we're complaining and grumbling, they don't. And so people ask us for the things that we have skills for. And sometimes we confuse what's happening in our life, and we think the admiration of those people compared with the conflicts that I might have with those who are closest to me, like the conflicts with Lisa. So some days I even said, you know what, Lisa, everybody thinks I'm a good person, but you don't seem to get it. Like you don't understand what a good person I am. And Lisa, with her wisdom, says, well, the problem is, John, I know you.
Nicely. I said that nicely.
Very nicely. And so, you know, the Camino gave us this time and this space. And how much time? Well, Lisa would say, for example, I would like us to talk about what happened at dinner last night, with that conversation and that little bit of tension. I'd say, okay. So she would talk about her part. Say, what do you think? How do you feel? So, well, I need to think about it a little bit. She'd say, okay. So we'd walk on in silence, maybe half an hour. And she'd say, are you ready to talk? Oh, no, because I hadn't thought about it yet. And so we walk on, and I would say, she said, well, how long would you like to think about it? I said, well, I just need to think for a little while, so maybe we'll go to the next town. Maybe it's an hour down the road.
So I, in my personality, would say, how many minutes? And I'd take out my cell phone and set a timer. 20 minutes? Okay, 20 minutes.
So she said, we're going to walk in silence for an hour. Well, what happens when I walk in silence for an hour, We get to the next town, and Lisa says, okay, I'm waiting to see like what you've thought, what great process. And I honestly am thinking, what were we talking about? I don't remember. And so where I used to defend myself and say, how can I be expected to remember all of these things? You know, some little problem. I can't remember that. You shouldn't expect me to. So like it's your problem. I had to realize, Lisa would say, well, I wonder if you could just think about that. If you could ask yourself, why don't I remember? Because I've told you this is important to me, and I would like to talk about it, and you don't even think about it, you don't remember it, you just like, there was nothing. And so I needed the time, because now we're going to walk on the rest of the day, and I realize, and the rest of the week, and the rest of the month, I just need to do the hard work. And I need to say, why don't I remember? Why don't I? I'm running away from it. I'm avoiding the conflict. I don't like the negative energy. I'm afraid of what Lisa might say or do. And so I've learned in my mind to just like somehow shut it out, like it never happened.
And I usually, up until now, would get judgmental about that. What is his problem? Why can't he think about that? Why is he not valuing me? I would assign all these moral values to this way of being of John's. And it's actually not a moral thing. It's that he is made this way. He is engineered this way by God, who knows better than I know. And I need to express then my need and wait for him to hear that and be able to talk about it eventually. But if I'm being judgmental or critical or angry, that's definitely going to shut him down, and we'll have no communication. So the skill starts with listening, and with being able to listen to the other person without assigning any moral value on whatever they're saying or doing, and try to establish the connection. You see why it took us a long time to do this.
Okay, that's just like one little illustration, but it goes beyond listening. Those of you who have lived a little bit, then you know. It's not just listening, because it means maturing. Because I had to go beyond just listening to Lisa and remembering and being ready to talk about it, to understanding what have I done in my life, with my life all these years, so that when somebody's negative or complaining, or that I consider that they're negative or complaining, or they're saying something that I don't want to hear, I can just like block it out like it didn't happen. And so then I have to grow and mature. And if I believe that the scriptures teach us that God can change our hearts from the inside, and that's the best way forward always, then I have to learn how to grow and change and be in this process of transformation myself. How can I pastor you and say, you need to change, I want you to change, God wants to change your heart, and I'm not experiencing life change myself? So the Camino was giving us that space and that opportunity.
Silence. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still and know that I am God. Our world is filled with noise. You ever noticed a child's game on an iPad or on a phone? All kinds of sounds, and you think, oh my goodness, we need silence. We're losing our silence, and losing our silence is damaging our souls. Again, we need to be proactive in creating times and spaces for silence in our lives. Silence is more than not talking. Silence is giving our minds a rest from input, from thinking, from distractions. Silence is to be present where you are. What's real here and now? How do you feel this minute? We can only know that through silence.
It's not always this easy to sit still and be silent. And that was one of my challenges. I learned I'm not very good at this. lots of things I like to think about, and so then I would get bored and I'd want something to think about. So I wanted the walk to be about culture or history or books or monasteries. And to practice being silent and say, can I be silent for 3 minutes and come to a place of just peaceful silence? Many of you can. I mean, you just watch the sunset or different things, but can I be still and be okay with just me being me? It's hard to be silent. And it was hard for me, at least. And so asking these questions helped me. Lord, what would you like me to know about whatever this is that's going around in my head? Or asking this question, how is God coming to me or speaking to me or guiding me through these circumstances? Hadn't really thought about that, and it takes some silence and stillness to ask and to wait.
Another lesson we learned is about Sabbath, the importance of living our lives in a rhythm. Definition that I love for Sabbath is to cease from what is necessary, to embrace what gives you life. That's from a book I read about Sabbath by Mark Buchanan. Sabbath is a vital part of God's established rhythm for our life. It's a 24-hour period each week. The Jewish people of faith celebrate it from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. What is it to cease from that which is necessary? What is the necessary stuff you do in your life? What is your work? Is your work related to the computer? Ceasing from the computer. Is your work related to the telephone? Cease from the telephone. Is your work related to people? Cease from the people. What do you need to cease from to give yourself, your soul, that space? Sabbath means to stop, to rest, to delight, to contemplate. To contemplate, that's kind of a long word, means to view or consider with continued attention, to meditate on, to think about who we are and who God is, to think back on our week. During this 24-hour period, just think back about everything that happened in this week, all the gifts that God gave, all the experiences that you've had, all the feelings, what's been going on inside for the past 6 days. Again, we bring to a crisis the person we already are. If we're living out of a rhythm, off a rhythm, then what happens when a crisis happens? A crisis can be something like a flood in the bathroom. But if I have no margin in my life, if I have no Sabbath, then even a small thing like that can set me off.
Okay, so basically we've decided, I realized I wasn't practicing Sabbath. I wasn't having those margins, a lot of different reasons. I've shared some of them in the past. But so for us, Friday. So Friday, generally, occasionally you'll catch me answering the phone because I'm still learning this. And I just want to see what's on the phone. But I'm learning to rest and to delight and to be still. And part of it is having that confidence and the trust that I hadn't realized that I didn't really have. I wasn't trusting the Lord with my time. And I was feeling like I was indispensable. I was necessary for this world to work. And I realized I could even be gone from here for a year. And things went on fine. We all make our contribution, so don't get me wrong about that. But the world goes on. And so trusting the Lord that He's in charge of our time and giving that to Him.
Our last lesson is to slow down, and we will speed up so that we can finish this quickly. But to slow down, we've talked about silence, the importance of silence in our days, the importance of Sabbath in our weeks. All of this is for the purpose of slowing us down internally. We can't do anything about the world around us. The world is speeding up and demanding more and more and more. But inside, do you live in a rhythm? Are you living slowly? Why slow down? Won't we miss important things in our life if we slow down, if we're not living at the same pace as everybody else? Actually, the fact that we can't slow down or don't want to is a warning sign. What does that mean? Life is not a race. It's not about getting more and more and more done. Life is about relationships. Life is about learning to live together with others, loving well, learning to be whole people. What if, because we're after the urgent, we miss the important?
So James said this well. He said, "Listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into this city and spend a year there, carry on business, make money. Why, you do not even know what what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. We're human beings, not human doings. The world tells us around us that what we do, we are what we do, or we are what we have, or what other people say about us. What we do and have and what people think is important, but who we are is the most important."
And God said it a long time ago. Jesus said it a long time ago. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. That's what we're learning. That's our passion for ourselves, and that's our passion for us as a community, that we can learn the rhythms and learn the love and therefore be different people. Be an offering to the world around us that is going crazy, that is getting out of control. To find connection with God. How? How can we find connection with God? Does it matter if we do or don't? I think we can pretend that it doesn't matter for a long time. But eventually we realize, wait a second, I'm missing something really important. I need something more in my life. And that more is God. And so the Lord gave me a year verse for this year that reaffirms, that confirms all of these lessons. This is a large work I've called you into, but don't be overwhelmed by it. It's best to start small. That's what God does. He changes my life, and then through my life, your life, and then through your life, another life, and it's one life, and one life, and one life. God is always working. He's never in a hurry, and he's never late.
I'd like to have the band come up, and we'll close with a song and a prayer. But we want to invite you as we sing, to conclude, as we pray, to ask God to guide you. And if you feel hungry in your life for some change, for some silence, some solitude, some Sabbath, some slowing down to love others well, then we'll be praying for that. And if you'd like us to pray with you or for you after the service, then we'll be glad to. We'd love to do that as well.